House of the Dragon is a Game of Thrones prequel set almost 200 years before the main series. This means that there are tons of changes to be discovered. The Westeros depicted in House of the Dragon is very different from the relatively peaceful one we saw at the start of Game of Thrones. And in today's video, we'll be showing you the 10 biggest differences. Let's dive right into the video. At number 10, we've got the fact that dragons still exist. Perhaps the most obvious change between the two series is the fact that dragons are still very much alive and active in Westeros. At the time of House of the Dragon, while in Game of Thrones these mighty creatures have gone extinct, the prequel still very much has a bunch of them flying around King's Landing and Dragonstone. The dragons are the real reason behind the power and might of House Targaryen, and since the prequel is set during the golden years of the dynasty, we aren't surprised to learn that dragons still existed. The upcoming Targaryen civil war to be shown in House of the Dragon is known as the Dance of the Dragons, and we're sure it'll become apparent in it just what happened to the dragons and why they're no longer present by the time Game of Thrones starts. After the events of the Civil War, dragons weren't seen in Westeros for almost centuries until the arrival of Dany's 3. Next at number 9, it's the fact that the Targaryens were at their peak. As you'd expect, having a bunch of dragons under your belt is a huge power-up, especially against other houses that don't have anything close to the kind of technology required to combat them. This allowed the Targaryen family to reign supreme, and they were at their peak during the events of the prequel series. To be fair, the family ruled over a mostly peaceful kingdom, and most of their enemies had been subdued thanks to the dragons. Other families also had peaceful ties with them, if only out of fear of being burned alive if they didn't comply. Game of Thrones, on the other hand, started years after the Targaryens lost the Iron Throne following Robert's rebellion. At this point, most of the Targaryens had died, with only a few survivors scattered worldwide. The show frequently highlighted the tyrannical rule of the Targaryen dynasty, particularly with regards to Aerys II, also known as the Mad King. His reign as the last Targaryen to sit on the Iron Throne was marked by cruelty and madness. No one has any love for the family in Game of Thrones, which is something Dany finds out when she arrives at King's Landing. It's possible that no one especially loved the family even during the time of the prequel series, but they bowed to them due to their powerful dragons. Moving on to number 8, the king was loved by the people. While the Targaryen family might not be the subject of people's affection, King Viserys I certainly was. He's known in history as one of the most peaceful and kindest Targaryen rulers ever. He's a standout person from the family. With many ruthless figures as leaders, the kingdom prospered during his rule, and most of the small folk lived in tranquility. The only real blunder that Viserys made was the fact that he didn't properly cement Rhaenyra as his chosen heir, allowing for the civil war to take place after his death. This left much of the continent in shambles and resulted in a huge loss of lives. Many even believed he was weak and couldn't take a stand when required. He was oblivious to the growing hatred between his wife and his daughter and couldn't stop the seeds of the conflict from being planted between the two. The weird part about Viserys is that despite his rule being ideal for most people, he still had doubts about whether he was a worthy ruler. He believed that he was unfit to rule because he hadn't seen the type of glory that other Targaryen kings had during their rule. This just goes to show how accepting of violence and war the family had become. Plus, at number 7, King's Landing was wealthier. King's Landing is perhaps the most iconic place in all of Westeros. The city played a huge part in the prequel and was one of the mainstay locations. Even in the original series, fans of House of the Dragon may have noticed that despite taking place 200 years ago, the city actually looks much better in the prequel than it did in Thrones. And much of this is because it was a lot wealthier back then. The realm was at its peak during King Viserys' reign, and the capital definitely gives off this vibe through its visuals. King's Landing is a complete mess in Game of Thrones if you were to compare the two. Many characters have remarked on the awful smell that's present everywhere in the city. Plus, there's a ton of violence. Many of the small folk are also starving, causing them to commit violent acts to get some justice. An example of this is the riot that started in the second season. At number 6, it's the Gold Cloaks. The City Watch is tasked with protecting King's Landing. Most of the small folk refer to them as the Gold Cloaks because of their iconic uniform. The group didn't wear these golden cloaks before Daemon took over. He was the one one who overhauled the organization, changing their uniforms and making them more ruthless than they'd been before. While he wasn't their commander for a long time, these men continued to have a lot of loyalty to Daemon. It's clear that they abided by proper rules, and there wasn't much room for corruption or malpractice during the time of the prequel. The same can't be said for the organization in Game of Thrones. The City Watch is corrupt and dangerous in the main series. They're enablers of the king's terrible actions and allow Joffrey and Cersei to be cruel without care. They exercise all their commands without any questions or worries. Next at number 5, it's the fact that the Hightowers were quite powerful. Otto Hightower is shown to be one of the most influential people in the Game of Thrones prequel. His scheming is what led to the dance happening in the first place. His house, Hightower, is also one of the most powerful houses during this time. They're located in the major city of Old Town. In the Game of Thrones series, the Hightowers are depicted as having lost much of their former influence and prestige. While some family members still participate in the political affairs of the Seven Kingdoms, they're no longer as prominent as they were in the past. The most notable Hightower character mentioned in the series is Allery Hightower, Marjorie Tyrell's mother, who is only mentioned in the books and does not appear in the TV series. Overall, the Hightowers are portrayed as having largely retreated from the intrigues and power struggles of the realm. Moving to number 4, the Valyrians were much more influential. Much like the Hightowers, the Valyrians were more prominent overall in the prequel. They're shown to be among the most powerful houses in the series, especially since they're one of the few survivors of Old Valyria. This made them great potential marriage partners for House Targaryen since it kept the Valyrian bloodline pure. Although the house exists in the world of Game of Thrones, they have lost much of their power and influence. They are not mentioned in the television series, but they are present in the books. According to the books, the house is known to be supportive of Stannis. For our number 3 spot, we've got the fact that incest was fairly common. Cersei and Jaime being an incestuous relationship were a huge focal point in Game of Thrones and one of the major reasons behind the conflict. Figuring this secret out is what caused the death of Ned and led to the start of the war. The Faith of the Seven disagrees with incest, and the Faith Militant even prosecutes Cersei for committing it with her cousin Lancel. But things are quite different in House of the Dragon. The Targaryen family is known for their incestuous relationships. They strive to keep their blood pure, which means marrying cousins and siblings if they have to. Viserys I is married to his cousin Aemma in the series. Even Aegon II is married to his sister Helena. Even during this time period, the Faith didn't approve of the practice, but the Targaryen were so powerful that they saw themselves as an exception to the rule. At number 2, it's the fact that the Dragon Pit still stood. Dragons are going to be a huge part of House of the Dragons. It's in the name, so we'd hope so. The Targaryen family has had access to a bunch of fully grown dragons since the days of Old Valyria, and to keep these dragons safe, they developed the Dragon Pit. Keeping them secluded in these pits allowed the Targaryen family to exercise some control over the dragons without limiting their powers too much. We've already gotten a glimpse of it in the first season, and we think it may appear again in the second one. Though the condition of the Dragon Pit is completely terrible in Game of Thrones, unsurprisingly, with no dragons around, there's not much use for a dragon pit. The place is in ruins, and it's a big reminder of how the prominence and prevalence of the Targaryen family are all but gone by this time in the series. Finally, at number 1, it's the Iron Throne. The Iron Throne is probably the most iconic thing in the entire series. It's the thing that many major characters in this story are after, and it's both a symbol of power and corruption. At the very core of it, it's the thing that has led to the ceaseless wars that have ripped Westeros apart decade after decade. It's made with the 1,000 blades of Aegon the Conqueror's enemies. In the House of the Dragon, the throne looks much closer to how it's supposed to be in the books. The Iron Throne in Game of Thrones, while mostly depicted as a single chair made of swords, differed from its depiction in the books. This change was met with disappointment from fans at the time, but upon reflection, it might actually make sense in the story's context. It's possible that when King Robert Baratheon took over, he removed many of the swords from the Iron Throne in an effort to downplay the former Targaryen ruler's power and legitimacy. That's a wrap for this video. Which of these differences did you find was the biggest? Comment down below. Give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you at the next one.